Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we oftentimes call moral heuristics. And moral heuristics comes from a social cognitive perspective. And so we can think of it in a lot of ways that we actually think of social cognition, that it oftentimes works, but sometimes it doesn't work so great. Okay, but so a few things. We're going to have an exam that starts next Friday. So I guess it's Sunday right now. Starts next Friday, and I'll give you until, say, Monday night to do it. Again, you can have 2 hours or so to complete it. Let's see. Okay, so and the exam is going to, of course, include weeks 11 through 15, which is moral communities, religion, moral heuristics, and dual process morality, which I'm going to be talking about now. And then a little bit on free will. Most of what you're going to need from your I think you have a homework assignment on free will, and so that should prepare you pretty well for the exam. One thing that I'm not going to be lecturing on is actually on groups, but there's a little bit on groups that is available on D2L. I don't have a lecture on it, but there's a set of slides called groups, and that stuff is pretty well covered in the textbook. So what I want you to do is just go into that file, go to groups, take a look at those slides, and look up the terms in your textbook. There's not a lot on groups, but there will be some, and the limited amount actually that we will have on the exam is from that set of slides. Again, it's an issue actually where I kind of think you're just as well just going through, taking a look at the slides, and then taking a look at the textbook. And that's probably the best way to do. Again, I don't always lecture everything on everything that's going to be in the exam, but the vast majority of things that are on the exam is in lecture. The times where there is content that is not, that is on exam that is not in lecture, I tell you exactly what it is. Okay, and so that should be on your in your study guide as well. Okay. So all right, I'm not gonna talk about this. It's just a little bit of a review. This is a bit for you to review moral foundations theory for your exam. Okay, let's take a look at a clicker item here. Secular liberals and religious conservatives are both prone to adherence to magical thinking and to accept evidence inconsistent with. No, they don't accept evidence inconsistent with their worldviews. They are prone to adherence to sacred values. That's true, and they tend to. We dismiss evidence inconsistent with their worldview. So the answer is B. When it comes to the domain of fairness, liberals tend to emphasize equality, and conservatives emphasize proportionality of effort to reward. That's right. So there's a sense of fairness both liberals and conservatives have, but they sometimes emphasize certain aspects of it. Liberals emphasizing the outcome of equalities, conservatives emphasizing the process, right? That if you put in, you get out what you deserve. This is Dan Kahan's study of motivated reasoning among liberals and conservatives. Which of the following best describes responses when they're asked the IQ test was right? They took an IQ test, and they're asked to say, and then the IQ test was said to correlate with liberal views or with conservative views, depending on which condition you were in. Liberals believed it was valid when they were told it was linked to liberal views, but not when it was linked to conservative. That's true. Conservatives believed that it was valid when it was told it was linked to conservatives, but not. Yes, that's true. Liberals were more likely than conservatives to endorse the test when it supported it. Yes, there was more bias in this and that study among liberals. Highly intelligent people were more likely to accept confirming evidence. Yes. Recall that because you're smart doesn't mean that you are less prone to bias. In fact, sometimes we're more prone to bias because we're just better at rationalizing our intuitions. Okay, so the correct answer is E, all of the above. Sacred values among members of moral communities are considered taboo to violate and angrily defended when questioned. Yes, more angrily defended by conservatives than liberals, not necessarily tied to religious consciousness purity, but not secular notion. No, that's not true. More readily traded for tangible reason. No, that's not true. No, looks like the correct answer is A, considered taboo to violate. Various lines of research on the effect of religion on altruistic behavior suggests that it provides people with a sense of accountability to others. Yes. Highly religious people give far more charity than... Yes, that's true. Highly religious people are less promiscuous. Yes, that's true. On average, statistically. Priming God concepts of the mind... yes, all of the above is true. You prime God... Yeah, all of those are true. Tendency to reject or be overly skeptical is illustrated by the moralistic fallacies. That's true. A disconfirmation bias characteristic of both liberals and conservatives? Yes. The answer is A. The answer is E, A, and C. Which of the following support the idea of religion enforces our moral instincts? Priming God concept. Yeah, that's true. People who belong to a major religion give more to others. Yeah, that's true. Highly religious people give more. Yes, that's true. Malaysians. Yeah, that's true. All of the above. Okay. People are less likely to live when they have eyes. Eyes trigger non-conscious brain that gives rise to illusion of consciousness. Yeah, that's right. No. That gives rise to the illusion of consciousness. Well, okay? Well, that might be true, but let's see. The injunctive message of give a hoot, don't pollute. No. Eyes reinforce the injunction against learning because eyes denote accountability and non-anonymity. Yes, the correct answer is C. So we're going to talk actually about the trolley problem today. So imagine that you've got a switch that you can turn a trolley onto a sidetrack. You can save 5, but you're going to kill 1. What do you do? Do you pull the switch or do you not pull the switch? As it turns out, most people will say you should. It's okay to pull the switch. Okay, so why is that the case? We'll get that to in a second. So imagine actually the same situation. The trolley switch actually is broken, and so the only way that you can, in fact, actually stop the trolley is to push a big guy actually into the oncoming trolley. His weight and his girth, also his backpack has got metal in it. He will stop that trolley, and you can save 5 lives if you're willing to push the big guy, actually the truck. So what should you do? Should you push the big guy? You should not push the big guy. As it turns out, most people say it's wrong actually to push the big guy this time. So in the first situation, we think it's okay to pull the switch. It's okay to cause the death of 1 person to save 5. In the second situation, we think it's actually inappropriate actually to kill 1 person to save 5. So why? Well, people have talked about what is the most consistent way of actually thinking about morality, and out of moral philosophy, we have tended to have 2 primary lines of thinking. One called utilitarianism, or sometimes consequentialism, and the other deontology, or duty-bound morality. So utilitarianism is something actually that seems quite rational to most of us. You think about the consequences of what your actions are going to provide, and then you make the best decision accordingly. And so in this case, the ends might justify the means. You're going to maximize utility for the greater good. You can think of actually another coherent way of thinking about things is that you're non-consequentialist, is that you care more about the process of justice than you care actually about the outcomes. So you're going to think actually about what your duty is, what the right thing to do is, regardless of how the outcomes come out, right? And it's necessarily a rule-based, and it's necessarily steep into standard views of what our rights are, what tradition says, and maybe what we believe actually God thinks that is the right thing to do for us. And so in this case, morality isn't relative to actually to what you think the outcome is going to be for the greatest good. It's just going to be, there's an intrinsic right or wrong. It's universal and absolute, right? Regardless if it's going to save lives or it's not going to save lives, you have to do the right thing, right? So you can think of this in terms of actually clarifying these 2 threads of philosophy. You can think, is it okay, ever right to lie? Well, if you were a utilitarian, you would say, of course it's okay to lie. What's the outcomes of your lie? If it's going to save lives, if the Nazis come to your door and ask if you have any Jewish friends hiding in your attic, and you say no, well, that's actually a good thing, right? You're saving lives. You should lie. It's a moral thing to lie, right? If you were a deontologist, you would say something like, well, it's not my duty to lie, right? It's not my, I need to actually tell the truth and let God sort them out. Let the chips fall where they may, right? I'm not going to pull the switch to make allow a guy to get killed by a trolley. I'm going to let, it's not my decision. I should make that choices for people. I'm going to let God sort it out. Is it ever right to torture? Well, if you're a utilitarian, you think about the consequences and you say, well, sure, you could torture a terrorist, right? Or maybe even break the arm of his son if he's going to blow up New York City and kill 6 million people. Right? If you actually believe that there's certain aspects of right and wrong, and then there's something intrinsically wrong with torturing somebody, then you'll say, well, no, right? It's not the right thing to do. It doesn't matter, actually, if we save lives. Torture is intrinsically wrong. You shouldn't do it. Is it okay to boil a baby? Well, it turns out Americans boiled a couple of babies, actually more than a few, in Japan in 1945 when they dropped several atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so, yes, we boiled anyone that actually was in a pool or in a bath or in a river at the point of contact when those nuclear bombs went off were boiled. Okay, and the idea was, okay, we need to boil some babies so that we don't have to send a bunch of men over to invade Japan and finally win the war. Okay. Okay. Anyway, I'm not teaching you actually what here is right or wrong. I'm just saying if you come from a rationalist, outcome-based moral judgment system, you'll say it's all relative. What are the outcomes? Then you make a decision. If you come from a duty-bound or deontological perspective, then you would say, no, it's never okay to boil a baby. It's never okay to torture, right? If you're following specific kinds. And so, as it turns out, these either of these ways of thinking about the world doesn't explain why we're so inconsistent about this, right? Because if you were utilitarian, as it turns out, and most of us are when we're actually asked this particular question, about this particular dilemma, we will say things like, yes, 5 people being saved is better than 1 people is better than 1 people being saved. And so you should, in fact, actually pull the switch. It's the right thing to do. You take action to save lives, right? But then we don't when it comes to the footbridge problem. We have to push the big guy down, right? So we are inconsistent. We're utilitarian when thinking about the first sentence, but we're not utilitarian when we're thinking about the second. We just think it's wrong actually to push on somebody. Okay, and surveys show, in fact, actually. Okay, so again, in the other case, most of us, the vast majority of us, actually think it's okay. Are we so inconsistent? So we can think of this in terms of something called moral heuristics. And moral heuristics comes from a tradition that we might actually call a linguistic analogy to moral grammar, in which people mix and match heuristic rules that lead to actually our moral judgments and actions. So these rules of grammar are operative in the same way actually that we learn to speak before we actually ever learn the rules of grammar. But we learn them because we adapt them because we're born to learn it, right? We're born to learn language. And so we can speak language perfectly grammatically correct without ever being trained actually that we're doing it, and we don't even know that we do it. In the same way, actually, we can think of a lot of our moral grammar, our moral judgments, our moral heuristics are operative, but we don't know why they do it. Right? So if we're asked about it, a lot of times we don't. It's an intuition. So there's a couple ways of thinking about it. One is actually called the action omission bias, which says that harm caused by action is worse than equivalent harm by omission. Again, just to clarify, now we're walking away a little bit from philosophy, and we're actually going strictly to psychology. And these are the psychological rules of moral that will explain, in fact, actually why we are so inconsistent on our moral judgments, at least in situations such as this. Harm caused by action is worse than harm caused by the contact principle. Harm by contact is worse than equivalent harm without contact. And there's the means intention principle, which says harm intended as a means to an end is worse. So if we were actually, in fact, think about why we're inconsistent about these, we can ask ourselves, well, which of these does the dilemmas actually are violated? Which of these rules are violated by these dilemmas, right? So if we were actually to think about the first dilemma where you pull a switch, we should ask ourselves, well, does this violate the action omission principle? Right? So does it? Are you by doing so again, doing something is worse than not doing something. So you actually have to do something, right? You have to pull a switch. So yes, that's true. You have to do something. So it does, in fact, actually violate the action omission principle. Now maybe it doesn't. So maybe most of us will still say it's okay, but recall that's only one principle, and still about 15 to 20% of us will say no, it's not okay to do that. Right? It is a moral dilemma, and taking action to harm somebody, even if it's avoiding some greater good, by not doing something, it's still understandable as a moral dilemma, and so the action omission principle is in fact actually being violated. The contact principle is the contact principle being violated? Absolutely. You're contacting the harm by action is worse than harm by contact is actually harm at a distance. You're actually harming these people at a distance. You're contacting this switch. You're not contacting people, right? And so you're not violating the contact principle. The means principle is, are you using this person as a means to an end, or is he being used as a byproduct, right? He's really a byproduct. He's not being used as a means to an end. What you're using a means to an end is, in fact, actually the switch itself. Think actually about the footbridge. You have to actually, again, where you actually have to throw somebody onto the track. Do you actually have to do something versus not do something? Yes, you are violating the action omission principle. Are you violating the contact principle? Yes, you in fact are violating the contact principle, because you have to contact the big guy in order to get him down on the ground. Are you violating the means principle? Turns out, yes, you are violating the means principle. Why? Because you're literally using him as a means to an end. You're using him as the means to stop the trolley, therefore saving others. You are, in fact, violating all three of these, and so we become much more emotional as a function of violating each of these principles. And so when you become more emotional, you think less utilitarian. There's a couple of other ways of actually thinking about this to help bring home the fun. So John faces a tough opponent in a tennis match. He knows that his opponent is allergic to a food, and so they're in the cafeteria together right before the day before the match. He recommends that the food containing the allergen, like say it's peanut sauce or something like that, he recommends that the other guy actually eat the peanut sauce because he knows it's going to hurt his performance the next day. Or the opponent orders the food, but John doesn't say anything. So which one of these is worse? But telling him specifically to go ahead and eat the peanut sauce, or just watching him eat the peanut sauce and not saying anything? Well, most of us actually will say, yes, it's going to be worse by actually specifically telling him to eat the peanut sauce. Why? Because that's the action omission bias. You can omit, you can tell an active lie. If you tell an active lie, it's seen as worse than telling a lie by omission. Right? You could have told him the truth in situation B, but because you omitted to tell him the truth, it's seen as less worse than specifically telling him the truth. Okay? That's an illustration of action omission. Terrorists are sleeping in a safe house, and they've been ID'd by Intel. You got to go and kill the terrorists. And you're told actually you should go. What's worse actually if you go and do this? You go and butcher the terrorists with an axe. You go with an axe and you bludgeon all of them in their sleep, or you order a strategic bombing. You call it in, fighter jet comes through and drops a bomb. Which one's worse? Well, most of us actually will think of that the butcher with an axe is going to be worse. Why? Because it's up close and personal. You're contacting the person. Right? You have to contact the individual in order to butcher them with an axe. Where if you dropped a bomb, you're far away. The outcomes are the same. There's going to be a bunch of people all splattered and broken up into little pieces. Okay, but it matters how you do it. If it's up close and personal by contact, seems more morally worse than in fact actually dropping it. Okay, so anyway, so again, this is actually illustrating a little bit more how we know, in fact, actually that that contact is really important. So, for example, actually, if you pull a switch to have the trolley kill a fat man, and so you're using him as a means to an end, but you're not contacting him, we tend actually to think that we're kind of 50-50. Whereas we usually say, oh no, it's wrong actually if you have to contact him to kill him and use him as a means to an end, when it's the case actually that that he's actually being used as a means to an end, but you don't have to contact him. We're about 50-50, right? We're not, it's not like 15% of the time we say it's okay when you completely don't have to use him as a means to an end. You don't have to contact him, right? You just use a switch. But then again, it's not the 85 to 90% actually that we're against it when we say, oh, it's okay to, you have to contact him and you have to use him as a means to an end. Okay, what if the big guy's death is inevitable? What if he's actually dying or if he's dead? Then is it okay? As it turns out, this is what we call Pareto efficient. If the guy is dying, then we can say actually that one party is this is Pareto, and you use his body as a means to an end, and he's already dead or dying. Then you could probably make the argument that that this is Pareto efficient. Nobody's worse off. Right? The guy's already dying or dead, and then at least one other individual is better off. The 5 people actually that would otherwise die are going to be better off. And so this is a situation where at least one party is made better off. So when it comes to, in fact, actually using the fat man's body as a trolley stopper and he's alive, 15 to 20% of us say, no, you shouldn't do it. But in fact, actually, if he's already dead, about 90% of us say it's okay to do it. If he's about to die, about 80%. Right? So we understand the idea of Pareto efficiency, at least when we consider third party. However, one thing I want to note is that when we're involved, like for example, one person is better off and we're made no worse off, we act like capuchin monkeys, right? So if your coworker gets a raise but you don't, you feel it's unfair, right? So if somebody down the hallway gets a raise and then somebody else in his office didn't get a raise, you don't think it's unfair. But when it's happening to you, it's up close and personal, you think it's unfair. Let's see. So I think we are then done here for the day. Trust that made sense. Hope that recorded.